When I was younger, I wanted to be a caricaturist. In the end, I've become a caricature myself.
Karl Lagerfeld always said fashion designers are not artists. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, when you look at a big portion of the whole exhibition, the sketches, mm-hmm. there is some artistic talent there.
He said, I had to enlarge everything. I had actually to multiply that Chanel language. Otherwise, it would have been just another women's suit.
There are many Warholian elements. Why? Because he was also friends with Andy Warhol. Warhol even got along with his mother.
Welcome to another fashion talk today with Liz Steiger from Pelagona and the Pink Lookbook.
And Ivana from Madame Faction.
We are two art historians with a special favor for past and present fashion phenomena. And today we're coming together to talk about the one and only Karl Lagerfeld and the grand exhibition that is currently devoted to him at the Metropolitan Museum in New York.
When we talk about Karl Lagerfeld, we talk about somebody who is more than a fashion designer, maybe even more than a person. And in the course of the research for this talk today, I found many labels for Karl Lagerfeld. He was a writer, a publisher, a photographer, an interior designer, a theatrical designer, a collector connoisseur, and...
Well, a fashion designer, I guess.
In the end. And it already shows us the many facets of this persona, Karl Lagerfeld. I have to admit, I knew the icon more, the icon that we all know, the sunglasses, the fan, his polarizing comments. And when we decided to talk about him, at first, I had this really negative view on him because he also kind of fat-shamed me when he did this H&M collection, and I was too fat with a size 38, according to him. And I only knew him from the media, or the persona that he transported through the media. But when I then read more about him and saw all the interviews with his friends and his co-workers, let's put it like this, you saw a different side of him, these many facets. He was very well read. He was interested in so many topics. He was this old man in this suit who looks a bit old-fashioned. He came from a conservative background, but at the same time he was very progressive. He knew the newest music, the newest models. But before I go into details about how I got to know this person and how my relationship to Karl Lagerfeld changed over this, let me also quickly just give an overview of his life, which was a very long career.
Which was something, I guess.
It was quite interesting, actually, to also dive into his childhood and all his relationships. So Karl Lagerfeld was born in 1933 in Hamburg, in Germany, and 1933 was also the year where the Nazis came into power in Germany. He was born into an industrialist family. His mother, Elisabeth, and his father, Otto, ran a manufacturing company. Basically, they sold canned milk, which is not the sexiest product. But what his father, Otto, did was he turned it into a sexy product by branding. He called it Glücksklee, and then later on we will see how much this influenced Karl. His mother, Elisabeth, was very strict. Karl was an atypical child. His friends already said he was dressing up in these suits with a tie already as an 8-year-old. There's even a picture.
Imagine that.
Yeah, in the 1930s.
With a little tie.
With a ponytail.
With a ponytail.
So, yeah, a bit atypical. He also loved being in the attic on his own. And this is, again, something that he did all his life. He was always alone. And he sketched in the attic. And he was inspired by Simplicissimus, the magazine. And he actually wanted to become a caricaturist,
I think.
Difficult word in English. So, but when he was 19, later on he will say when he was 14, he left for France. His mother was actually one of the driving forces behind this, because she said, Karl, Hamburg is the gateway to the world, but that's it, the gateway. You have to leave. You have to go into the world. So he left, and in 1954 he won the Woolmark Prize.
That's the beginning, right?
Yes, and where he actually met Yves Saint Laurent.
Well, yeah.
Who we will
the two of them.
So Karl won in the coat category, and Yves Saint Laurent won for the dresses.
And excuse me if I interrupt you, it was actually the sketch.
It was a sketch,
It was a sketch, yeah.
And then the House of Balmain, which was his match, basically, they then turned that coat into, or they brought the coat to life. And also Balmain offered him his first full-time position, where he then stayed for, I think, 3 years. Then he went on to Patou. And then in the 60s and 70s, he joined Chloé and Fendi, where he was also their creative director. And in the 70s, he started to become famous. He had this lifestyle. He was very generous with his friends. He was in Saint-Tropez. He also met his life partner, Jacques de Berger. And in 1982, the thing happens, which we all know about. He took over Chanel, which was this kind of old-fashioned brand. By
Totally, yeah. He always said, I read it, he said Chanel war ein alter Hut.
Yes.
It was a totally old-fashioned brand, or like an old hat.
And only the Parisian ladies.
Of the diplomats.
Yes. So nothing that we now associate with Chanel. And then in the 90s, he turns himself into an icon. At first because of his lifestyle of like overeating and being really fat. But then at the turn of the century, beginning of the 2000s, he loses weight.
Those famous 42 kilograms, I think.
In 1 year.
In 1 year.
So, and also this whole cycle also coincides with the death of his partner, Jacques de Berger, who died from HIV/AIDS at the end of the 80s. So you could also see maybe this was his first time of like being emotional and all of this.
Struggling with what was happening. Yeah.
But then later on, he calls this diet his reinvention. He said, fashion needs to reinvent itself. I also need to reinvent myself. And in the early 2000s, he becomes a global brand, let's put it like this, with his collaboration with H&M. He was the first one. Yeah. And his famous saying was when H&M called, he said, who did you call before that? They said, no one, you're the first. Yes, then I do it. So he was also a risk taker, which I found quite interesting. So, of course, he's constantly reinventing himself, like the fashion he did, in a 65-year-long career. And coming back to the exhibition, it's a monographic exhibition about somebody who has such a long career. At Chanel, at Chloé, at Fendi, at his own label. He managed to do all of this. I don't know how many hours the day of Karl Lagerfeld had.
Did you say, I think you had a number of how many collections a year he was?
Up to 17 per year.
17. I mean, 17.
And with Chanel, he spent almost 40 years, if you think about it, until 2019, until he died. And he was also one of the enablers of prêt-à-porter, because he found the haute couture houses in the 60s and 70s, he found them a bit boring. So he had a new take on it, and he also benefited from this development. And then he, even as a fashion designer, he had many facets, because he did first for Fendi, he did dresses, he did hats, accessories,
shoes, jewelry, bags,
anything.
Yeah.
And he became a marketing machine.
Yeah.
Even though he sometimes claimed that he
doesn't know anything about marketing.
At the same time, he contradicts himself. And this brings me back to this criticism of his persona. The more I did research, the more contradictions I found. One contradiction is about this fat shaming. So on the one hand, he said, women of a certain size, they are not nice to look at. We know that he only wanted skinny models like Kate Moss, who were the general beauty ideal of the late 90s.
So size 0 it was actually.
Yeah. And at the same time, he then made comments like the world is not a beauty contest because intelligence and knowledge prevails, but beauty fades. So that's the very same person who says this. At the same time, we know that his mother very often made comments about him being too fat, saying things like, oh, you're lucky that you can't see yourself from behind because your bottom is
too big. It's enormous.
The same thing also for his hands and all this. So a lot of things maybe was also a personal struggle from the mother.
Yeah.
But at the same time, his persona was very carefully constructed. He knew what to say, and then maybe in the end I thought, these polarizing comments, maybe they were marketing.
Absolutely.
Maybe he was this Warholian project.
Dandy figure, and I think he enjoyed polarizing so much. That was, I think, the biggest pleasure of it all.
And he loved caricatures. So maybe he just made fun of us. And what, coming back to the exhibition, what is interesting is that they say we wanted to focus on the works and not the words. Yeah. Because Andrew Bolton also said in an interview, this may be more authentic. And I have to say, I only knew the words before. And then when I walked through the works, I got to know a different Karl Lagerfeld. So maybe this is what they wanted to achieve with Karl Lagerfeld, A Line of Beauty.
Absolutely, yes, I think so too, because they don't stop actually saying this claim, we're focusing on the works and not on the words. I mean, there has been a lot of backlash and a lot of hate speech. I mean, nowadays there is a lot of hate speech, no matter what you talk about. But in the context of Lagerfeld's comments, he was, I think, cancelled by many people many times, or he would have been cancelled actually. And I think there was also a lot of criticism during the Met Gala. We talked about this. We'll talk about it a little later, but. Andrew Bolton, the curator, is really focusing on this phrase, on this catchy phrase, actually focus on the works. And I think, as far as I have seen, I think they did a very nice job, because they have not created this classical retrospective in a chronological order, but they have actually focused on 2 or actually 3 ideas, like aesthetic ideas of his works. The one is the serpentine line, so everything that is curvy, everything that is decorative, floral, light, etc. And the other point is, of course, the straight line, so everything that is minimal, modern, austere, etc. And then there is also, which I like because it actually brings us back a little bit to his character, it's the satirical line. And of course, the satirical line, within this chapter, they focus on the dresses, of course, and on the outfits, but actually it's a little Lagerfeld-esque as well to call it satirical. So the exhibition shows, if I remember well, it shows 9 halls, 9 rooms, with each showing 7 outfits. The 7 was apparently the lucky number of Lagerfeld, which I myself like as a little detail. And they actually...
9, sorry to interrupt, the 9 plus 10, because it's the 9 dualities, and the 10th satirical line is his birth date. The 10th of September.
Of September, exactly. And so those 9 halls have actually always counterparts, for example, like feminine, masculine. So this again would focus on the serpentine and the straight line. We have romantic, military, we have rococo, classical, etc., etc. So these are these couples that are actually focused on. And what I also like, I like the exhibition architecture that was designed by
Tadao Ando.
Tadao Ando, exactly. And you have a very nice detail about this.
Yes, I think it was Andrew Bolton in an interview who said that Ando was actually supposed to build a house for Lagerfeld. They were friends, but
like a private house, like a
private one of his
like
many houses, and it never got built for some reason. And usually Ando is also famous for building temples. And now he got to build a temple for Lagerfeld. Now all the haters will say that, oh my God, now it's
how
a
could
temple
they
for
do
Lagerfeld.
this?
I don't think it feels like a temple. And also with what you said, with this like curved line and then the straight lines and the pyramids, it feels very clean. And it shows this, as they say, the dualities of Lagerfeld. On the one hand,
designs,
you have on the one hand you have this person who is interested in the 1850s. At the same time, he wears the silver rings and he's into rock and all these things. So it's sometimes even a contradiction, but somehow it worked.
Absolutely. But why did it work? I think because he was so well read and because he knew so much about culture or cultural history of the past centuries. And he was somebody who would really like play with all of these elements and become actually the icon, also the design icon that he actually became in the end, I think.
And talking about his knowledge or his interests, what I found interesting about the exhibition is that the curators focused on 2 art historians, very famous art historians, Erwin Panofsky and William Hogarth, as a base for the exhibition. On the one hand, Panofsky and his iconology, so cultural, social, and historical backgrounds of artworks. And then at the same time, this concept of lines, a curved line, a straight line by William Hogarth. So we have 2 art theories as the basis of a fashion exhibition. which is interesting. And it's even more interesting if we think about it that Karl Lagerfeld always said fashion designers are not artists. We always have this discussion, is fashion art, is it applied art? He said it's applied art, I'm an artisan. But at the same time, when you look at a big portion of the whole exhibition, the sketches, there is some artistic talent there. The sketches were very detailed, they were almost mathematical, they have so many instructions.
Technical details, yeah.
That had to be decoded by the ateliers. So I find it interesting. I'm not sure if he might have liked this, that now, again, we see fashion as a kind of art. At the same time, what's interesting in the exhibition is also that he was not, he was taking the risk of bringing together, on the one hand, what is fashion on the street and what is haute couture, which sometimes when I looked at his collections without much knowledge, I just looked at them, I was like, oh my god, these ripped jeans, sometimes even the sweatpants that he actually didn't like. Why is he doing this? But why did he do it? Obviously because he wanted to explore and also sometimes elevate trends. They went up from the street up into haute couture, sometimes they trickled down, which is quite nice.
Again is very Warholian actually as a concept if we think about it actually.
And what we didn't mention before is there are many Warholian elements. Why? Because he was also friends with Andy Warhol.
Yeah.
He was in a movie where he did like a very intense kissing scene, which I also didn't know.
Yeah, no.
And it's funny that two people who are that different on the superficial level actually got along well, and Warhol even got along with his mother.
Oh, so. Well, that means something, I guess. Well, let's also talk about his years and his influence at Chanel, because Chanel, of course, I mean, he has been equally long or even longer actually at Fendi than he has been at Chanel. But Chanel, of course, is the chapter that we associate actually with Karl Lagerfeld. I have a very nice quote. It's a Goethe quote that Karl himself actually quoted quite often, seemingly. He said, "Creating a better future with enlarged elements of the past." So when Lagerfeld was actually put into this new position of creative director at Chanel, as we said, Chanel was old-fashioned. Chanel was more or less at the end of its era. I think Gabrielle Chanel had died for about 10 years for this moment, and everything was a little bit modest, let's say, at this moment. And everybody was wondering, what the heck is this young cool guy gonna do at Chanel? And I think from the very first collection on, we have seen that he did a lot of good things with it, and that he actually said, okay, we have that past. We, of course, have a lot of elements that everybody, even then, at the beginning of the 80s, recognized that as Chanel. So we're talking about the camellia, we're talking about the women's suit, we're talking about the chains and all of these things. And he said, I had to enlarge everything. I had actually to multiply that Chanel language. Otherwise, it would have been just another women's suit, just as all of the other brands of the 80s actually showed. And that already shows that even though he said he's not an intellectual, he's not interested in the past, which is totally interesting, he was the one who knew the past, I think, very good. But as you said, was very equally interested in the present and present trends and any kind of ideas that were present at the 80s, during the 80s. And I think the mélange that he made was just like, I don't know, was very good and was very perfect for the decades to come.
The question is, what would Gabrielle Chanel have said about it? Because even he said in a quote, probably she would have hated it, what I'm doing.
Really?
Because I think, and even in the beginning, people were a bit apprehensive. They saw his collections, and because it's strong focus on accessories also, they found it a bit tacky. In the long run, he laid a groundwork for so many other fashion brands, because now we know for Chanel, the accessories, the bags, the belts, everything is a cash cow. So I think he did it from an artistic perspective, or a designer's perspective, however you want to call it, but also from a commercial. And
I mean, we don't have to forget it's the 80s. I mean, it's the decade of tackiness gone great. It's really the decade where you can really, where the maxim was more is more. And I also think, I mean, there is this famous quote of Coco Chanel who said, every time you go you leave your apartment, take away one thing. So take away, I don't know, even the red lipstick or the 2 flashy shoes or, I don't know, the shawl that you're wearing. So she was really about minimalizing actually the wardrobe. But this was coming from an era that we call Belle Époque, where like accessorizing and feathers and flowers and everything was really the antichrist it was the trend, but also the antichrist of Chanel. So I think in this point, he was probably right. But at the long run, if you take a look at those 40 years that he actually was creating Chanel, I think he was very much translating it in a manner that she would have loved, more or less.
I also think so. I also think that even though she might not have liked it, a lot of people didn't like what she did when women started wearing trousers. Exactly. Or also when she said you should mix real jewelry with fake jewelry.
Wear jersey, not always silk and stuff like this, which is also trickling down actually.
And it was maybe tacky back then for some people until it turned into a lifestyle.
Absolutely.
And what also connects those two is dandyism.
Absolutely, yeah. Chanel is said to be like one of the first female dandies, actually. Chanel, I don't know if you are familiar with it, but there is, I think, as many books as you can find with the quotes of Lagerfeld, you will find that many, maybe even more, books with quotes, famous quotes of Chanel. And let me tell you one thing, she wasn't nice also at every time she was actually telling her opinion. So I think he very, very, very much copied a lot of aspects of her and her persona. And in the end, I mean, she was also known to be there in a black and white women's suit, just as he was actually wearing his, gentleman's suit in that case. But it was more or less coming from the same family, actually. And therefore, I also think that she would have liked him a lot because he was really, really much at the coming from her direction, more or less.
Yeah, the provocation they definitely had in common. Also, this dandyism in the exhibition, they call it Brummelian because of Beau
Brummel, the first dandy.
And who actually, it was Baudelaire who is quoted as saying it's black and white.
Yeah. It's the black. Let me tell you one thing. I have just written it. Give me a second. It's the Black Prince of Elegance.
Yes.
That was the phrase, the catchy phrase of Baudelaire, a description of the 19th century dandy.
And from the history perspective, what I found interesting between Chanel and Lagerfeld was also the Nazi past. Because we know that there are books written about Coco Chanel that she may or may not have been a Nazi spy or a collaborator. And also Lagerfeld's family has a past within the Nazis. According to Stern, the family were members, the parents were members, even though there are letters afterwards by the mother that she regretted it. So there are also these rumors that he turned himself younger because not only to
appear
physically younger, but also to escape that past. And also this
just for clarification, so his real birth date was 33, and he claimed for a lot of time it was 38, right?
Yes. And these lies about the past, he also has in common with Chanel.
Absolutely.
He also exaggerated.
Coming from a poor background and then really like making up her past. Like in a best Hollywood movie.
And even though Lagerfeld didn't come from a poor background, totally the opposite, because his family financed he's going to Paris and then having this lavish lifestyle there. Yeah. Stories that he had to wait for the next check that mommy sent so that he could go to Saint-Tropez and all this stuff, or that he was indebted again. But nevertheless, he said, we had a castle or a palace in Germany. We were aristocrats, which was also not true. But all of this was fueled into this machine.
It was the part of the creation of the image and of the legend.
Which they both have in common.
Absolutely. Yeah. We know a lot of things about Chanel. How about the other brands that he worked for? I think Chloé and Fendi are your special interest.
Special interest, yes and no, because as you said, I knew that he was the creative director of these brands, but somehow we tend to forget, like this Chanel machine is so overpowering.
Absolutely, yeah.
And also we think in terms of Lagerfeld in black and white in many ways, and in many ways it's only Chanel. But then when you look at the exhibition, and this is why I like...
May I just interrupt? He was at Fendi from 65 to 2019.
Yeah.
I mean, wow! It's more or less his whole career.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think there was a small break in between, if I remember correctly, but still, he has a very close relationship to the Fendi sisters. And we only focus on this phase at Chanel. And what we forget is he managed to have a design language at four labels, for each also his own label. And what I found interesting is that they say in the exhibition, Chloé is more a bit romantic. I also have some examples where you see this strong reference to the 1850s, to the romantic era that he loved. Fendi is more the modernist, it's again this juxtaposition. So when we look at what they call the Rococo and Classical line in the exhibition, there's some Chanel, but this is one line where we see a lot of references from Chloé. We have the Crétoise dress, which is it looks very simple from the cut, but it has a trompe-l'œil effect with a classicizing intent. So you see the Greek garments that are referenced. It's
like the drapery, right?
The drapery. They call it illusionary hymation, which is this dress that was draped for men. And then also he had a bathing costume for Fendi in 1993, where you also see this draping effect. There were also some kind of like the fibulae, which is typically Greek. So you see he's again referencing the past in a classicist way. And then in this romantic line, we see a lot of designs for Chloé. We see a dirndl-like dress that was kind of merged. They call it with like an obi belt. Okay. Which I find interesting, like Austria and Japanese. And for me, being Austrian, I knew his designs for Paris, Salzburg in 2015. The Chanel, But when I saw these designs, it's so obvious that he was also a big fan of like a lot of things from Austria. He was a big fan of the secession. We know that he furnished his apartments. And these designs are really much more romantic than the Lagerfeld that we always see, this like black and white. There is one Chloé design in 1983 that is beautiful, like with tiered layers, and it references two things. This robe en chemise, which comes from France, from the queens, what they were wearing, and the crinolines, these big parts of the gowns with
skirt constructions.
Petticoat is already the easy version. But it's a bit dialed down, where it's a bit more narrow, but still very, very romantic, very beautiful, something very colorful. Everything that I now remember when I walk through this is colors, which I didn't expect. And then at the same time, you have this romantic design, and then you see uniforms. And at first, it's a clash. But they say in the exhibition, and it's quite an interesting way of looking at it. He said the romantic heroines were together with the war heroes. So very often you see references to World War One, the pockets in one of the Fendi leather jackets. And also some braided details, also sometimes going back to the cavalry in France in the 18th or 19th century. So it's very often these mixtures that you would not think, flowers and military.
Absolutely,
and this is what makes it interesting throughout all the lines. And another thing that I really enjoyed by looking through the Chloé and Fendi examples is his strong link to art. So even though he says, I'm not an artist, he admired art, he loved it, no matter the period. And then for me, one of the most beautiful things that he has done ever is Fendi 2016, where he referenced a Nordic artist called Nielsen. And he had those designs hand painted by an illustrator of his atelier. I think her name is Nicole Lefort. I'm really bad with names, I'm sorry. And he made beautiful coats and dresses, directly referencing fairy tale illustrations that Nielsen did. And it's kind of like not abstract, but you see the Nordic influence. You also see a bit of Art Deco. And it's directly, you can see the influence. It's so obvious and it's so colorful. And yes, we're talking about Fendi here. We're talking about animal fur, how it's being made, but which I found a bit difficult while looking at it. Because nowadays I don't think it's necessary to do that. But at the same time, it showed such a different aspect of this designer, of this person, and it again illustrates the different things he was interested in.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, talking about the fur, I don't know if you have seen, he has been saying, I think, at some occasions that if you ban fur, you should also ban eating meat and like banning any kind of usage of animals in our daily life. And of course,
he actually said it in even a worse way. I found one quote where he said, yeah, of course I'm against the killing of animals, but also I'm against the killing of people, and this is what's still
I've seen that. Yeah, that's true.
I think this was probably like shooting into this whole...
I had a more modest version. He just said, if you want to ban fur, you should ban meat, eating of meat as well. So there again, he was quite polarizing, and he was like the dandy he was. But yes, he used fur for a long time at Fendi, but he also... I've seen that actually at Chanel, they actually really tried with tulle, with like experimenting with a lot of material to imitate the fur of this animal or the fur of that animal, and that he was actually very much interested in this process of research and to making something appear to be fur. And I think he also invested a lot of like time and like really invested himself actually in this research process. And this again is an example of how he actually, what he said and what he did. And
the
he did both.
Because Chanel banned fur in 2018, but he still was working until his death for one of the biggest fur manufacturers in the world. So on the one hand, you do the research, on the other you have no problem doing it. I do think it's also related to his obsession about, on the one hand, the artisans and their craftsmanship.
Absolutely.
At the same time also the machinery, because the machinery aspect, he agreed with Chanel again. He said, machine made doesn't mean inferior. And we can also explore new things. So on the one hand, I think he was fascinated by how can I use the machines to make fake fur. At the same time, probably he looked at Fendi from like a very pragmatic perspective and said like, good, this is like a house that produces fur. What can we make from a craftsmanship perspective? And then there are these kind of, I have to admit, from the craftsmanship perspective, they are beautiful. There's
Wonderful.
This wedding gown. I forgot which year. I think also 2017 or 2016, where you see so many details. Like there was an entire cape that was crafted.
That was fur at the basis?
It was, I think, shaved mink.
Okay.
The effect is beautiful. There's also another dress that resembles willow trees. So people thought about it. Again, yes, looking at it and knowing it's mink. Yes. But this is also part of his career that his
legacy and his career.
At the same time, also coming back to this, trying to create new materials. He also did something very interesting for Fendi in 2009, where there was this black dress with a very exaggerated jabot, they call this ruffled thing, and this was laser cut to resemble lace. Which in 2009 I found quite interesting because this is
quite
long
early
before
actually.
all this laser cut and printing became too known.
Mainstream or So what we can say actually is that one can say a lot of things about Lagerfeld, but one can also know a lot of things about his career and his design legacy, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's also we need to question why he said certain things. Probably we'll never know, but I think the phenomenon of Karl Lagerfeld is similar to the media or the social media landscape that we are currently facing. It's very often about the headline.
Yeah, the clickbait.
The clickbait, one thing, and everybody gets really upset about this without reading the context and learning about it. And the more I researched Lagerfeld, the more I also had to think like, okay, did I do this man justice? I only took the headline.
Yeah.
Do I agree with his headlines? No. I also don't like what he said.
It still is the things that he said.
It doesn't justify what he said, but at the same time, I can't discredit his impact on the fashion industry, his impact as a designer, as a publisher, as all these things that we had in the beginning.
That he was, yeah.
So it's many facets, many dimensions to this person. And coming back to our previous video about the Met Gala, a lot of people only focus on one dimension of Karl, this black and white, the icon.
Actually, I think a lot of outfits of the ones that we also criticized harshly was the thing like the they really focused on his main look, like on the black and white, on the colors, on the I don't know, like all the shirts, the white shirts, and all of these things. And this is, of course, I mean, facing everything that he created. This is, I mean, one-dimensional is not even the word for it, actually. Yeah.
And it's actually kind of sad that this is what we associate with Karl Lagerfeld, only this very black and white picture of him, because I think what the exhibition did very well is this 360-degree review of him. And I have to agree with the curators and with Andrew Bolton when they said it may be more authentic to let the work speak. Because it definitely opened up different dimensions of this persona to me. To see it to see him in a different way, his work in a different way, and also to then think twice when I think about Karl Lagerfeld and he's rambling or something.
And I mean, also it's I think a lot of people take him very seriously, and I think a lot of things that he said were not as serious or were not thought to be as serious as a lot of people take them nowadays, more than ever, I think. At this point, I have another quote because quotes are his gold, I think, apart from all of these designs. You mentioned at the very beginning that he loved as a child that he was spending a lot of time at the attic and designing and actually drawing. And there is a quote, many years later, he said, "When I was younger, I wanted to be a caricaturist. In the end, I've become a caricature myself." And I think this sums it up very well, because it also shows how intentional it was. And if caricature or a joke is as intentional as it is, I think there's not so much space to think of it so seriously.
And it is what he always said about himself. There's another quote that says, "I don't take myself seriously."
Seriously, absolutely. And I think people take him like too seriously at all times.
So maybe the next time we all talk about his works or the persona, or there's the next quote that anybody refers to, maybe think about those two, about the caricatures and the taking seriously, and then it says a lot about this designer. Absolutely.
Well, I think thinking of Lagerfeld as a caricature actually is a wonderful conclusion of our talk.
Yes, I think so too. And I really enjoyed our conversation as always.
Same.
I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Let us know in the comments what you think about Karl Lagerfeld, about the exhibition. You can also let us know which topics you would be interested for future talks. And also, if you enjoyed this, subscribe to our channels, Madame Faction and Pink Lookbook. See you soon.